Hello, and welcome to Mental Health Matters. I'm your host, Liz Lang. Each week on this podcast, we will break down various aspects of mental health. We are so excited you're here and hope you enjoy this week's episode. Hey guys, Liz Lang here with Jeremiah and Selina from Core Connection. And this week we are going to get into the power of what you can control. And before we do that, I have this week's parenting moment, which is more of a caution to parents from something that I learned recently about AI. So I saw this video that really concerned me about this woman who was in an active relationship with her AI. So she was openly in a relationship with her computer, her cell phone, I don't know, but I just thought that was kind of alarming. And then I heard a statistic about apparently there's a large number of youth, and I don't have the facts of the statistics, but there is a large number of our youth that are in a relationship with AI. And having played around with the AI and used it, I understand why that happens. And I don't know if it's different if you have like a paid subscription for the AI. So I use Gemini Pro, and I've used it to track different things, and it's a wonderful tool. But I've said things like, "Oh, yeah, I had a rough night with the baby last night, so I have to adjust my cycling schedule for today." And it'll be so validating and so empathetic with you that I can understand why people are becoming emotionally reliant on this AI, because it feels like you're talking to a real person. So parents, you've got to be so careful with your teenagers, because it is not healthy to be in a relationship with a program. So that is my parenting moment. Just parents, even your teens that maybe they're old enough, maybe they're 16, 17, and you've given them, full access to a cell phone, have that conversation with them and check in on them, because you don't want that for your kid. That is not healthy or good for them. They need real people, not artificial ones.
Yeah, I think there's still so much to learn about AI and the effects, and we don't really understand it just yet. And it's changing so rapidly that it's hard to kind of keep up on the information. But it's definitely been a problem. It's something I've come across in my work as a counselor, and had some struggles with it with quite a few different clients. And not to mention the cheating aspect in schools and things of that nature. But definitely something we want to be paying attention to.
Yeah, we will be doing an entire episode on that eventually. So, stay tuned for that. We'll have some more information on that in the upcoming weeks. But, just in the meantime, just be careful of the rabbit hole that teens can go down. Okay, so building resilience through choice, perspective, and responsibility. So I really like the idea of this episode of focusing on what is within our control, because there is so much that is going to happen to you in life that you can't control, right? And so especially as a teenager, and teenagers are going to disagree with so much of what authority figures in their lives do. And maybe they have very good reason, and maybe what this authority figure, whether it be a parent, a teacher, a coach, what have you, maybe they aren't doing what is actually best. Maybe there is a better way. But as a teenager, that's not within your control. And so when you just focus on, oh, this adult is wrong, or, I had this awful thing happen to me, and when you dwell on that, it creates this victimhood of things are just happening to me, rather than I'm going to be in control of what is going on with me. And I also want to be very clear, we are not talking about instances of abuse or neglect. So if you ever have an adult or know of an adult who is abusing a child in any way, this is 100% different, and that requires obviously reporting and legal action. But a lot of times in those teenage years, they will spend a lot of time maybe worrying about things they have no control over. For example, a teacher who doesn't like them, friends that are excluding them, parents getting a divorce, a breakup, someone else's opinions. bad referees calls, college admissions, right? So what we want to do today is, instead of our teens asking, how do I control this? And start asking, what part of this belongs to me? What am I in control of? And when we can switch our teens and get them focusing on that, that is really, really powerful. And that can be extremely beneficial to them throughout the entirety of their life when they shift from, how do I control this to what do I control in this? What is within my capabilities to do something about? So tell me your guys' thoughts on this.
This is not a teenage problem. This is a human
Yes.
problem. I've seen this a lot with adults as well as teens, where we tend to focus on things that we have no control. We spend too much time worrying about what somebody else thinks or believes or says or does or whatever that looks like. My boss hates me, my coworkers are difficult, and we can't do anything about it. And when we waste our time focused on that, we do end up in this victim state of mind. And when we're a victim, you're right, life happens to us instead of us doing life. And when we can start to focus more on like what belongs to me and what can I control, then life gets a little bit easier actually and better. And if we can teach this to our teenagers, it does serve them throughout life, and they can find greater joy and happiness in their relationships and their work and in their day-to-day life, and they feel like they have a greater sense of control over what's happening around them.
I think there's other situations that aren't just people of authority that control their life and they don't have control over. You've got things like social media, the weather that affects us, and we can be upset about it or not upset about it, and we can't control it. But, a breakup, a friend who excludes them, there's also other things that they deal with. And like Jeremiah said, this is a everybody problem. What can I control and how do I want to respond?
Yeah. And, things being out of your control, I think you're right. That is going to translate through the rest of your life, because what else you can't control? Your boss. And like you said, coworkers. So this is something that, you're going to have to deal with. There's always going to be things that are outside of your control. And so if, as a teenager, you can shift that mentality of, okay, how do I work with what I have? How do I use what I have to my advantage? You're going to be set up for success. So let's dive into a real world example that a teen might face, and a lot of teens probably often face, and that is, my coach never plays me. So a parent's first reaction might be, oh, that's not fair. And maybe they want to get involved, and maybe they want to talk to the coach and they want to make a big deal about it. So why would that be problematic? And what should parents do instead?
Well, you're right. If we look at like youth sports, things have gotten pretty wild and often contentious. And a lot of it is because of this. The parent doesn't think it's fair. Look, every parent thinks their kids are amazing and, my kid could do better and they should play more. And that kid's not very good. Why is that kid playing? And sometimes coaches see things that parents don't or whatever. So I think the better conversation with your kid is to start to teach them, like, you're right, it might not be fair, but let's talk about what's within your control. When you give me that example, I always think back to, a great story about sports, and that is Michael Jordan, right? Like, we look at Michael Jordan, at least from my generation, like he was the greatest basketball player of all time. Not only a great basketball player, but there's a certain line of tennis shoes that he bears the name to, and it's been incredibly successful, and they're a very expensive shoe, and they're collected, and it's a really big deal. But what a lot of people maybe don't know, maybe they do know, is that Michael Jordan was cut from, I want to say it was his high school basketball team. He didn't make the team. And if his parents were like, oh, that's so unfair and they shouldn't have done that and blah, 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 and he walked away from it, we would never even know his name. But Michael Jordan, and I don't know what his parents said to him, but he made the decision, whatever that looked like, to, instead of become a victim, to work hard. and to work really, really hard. And he practiced and he practiced. And this is where he's at today, considered one of the greatest basketball players of all time, did some really wonderful things. And all of that came from focusing on what he can control. Well, he couldn't control being cut from the team. He couldn't control whether the coach played him or not. He couldn't control what others thought about him. But what he could control is how much he practiced, what effort he put in, what his attitude was. He could control those things. And when we focus on that with our kids, we can do a much better job of helping them move through life and make good choices.
And, let's be clear, sometimes bad things are going to happen to us. Like, you are going to have coaches that are a jerk, and you are going to have coaches, referees that are going to make bad calls, that are going to be unfair. And I think it is important to acknowledge that, and also to be frustrated about it, and to be okay with, what, this is frustrating. And, to let your teen feel that, and to let your teen express that. But, as you said, Jeremiah, and as Michael Jordan did, take matters into your own hands and focus on what you can control. All right, so we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about what's called the circle of control. So I want to make sure that our listeners understand this, because this is actually a really powerful tool for human beings in general. So there are 3 circles. There is things that you can control, things that you can influence, and things that you cannot control. So let's start with circle 1, things that are 100% within our control. Break that down for us.
Yeah, so this is kind of a powerful tool that we can use with our children to help them understand, and we can use on ourselves as well. But things that you can control are things like your attitude, your effort, your words, your choices, reactions, how you prepare, your honesty, your own efforts. They're things that you do specifically that can have an impact in your life.
Yeah. Okay. So now let's get into things that we can influence.
Influence are things like we can influence friendships and family. We don't control them, right? We think about a marriage, and some people think that they can control their spouse, and that's not true. You can influence your spouse, but you don't control them, especially not in a healthy relationship. You can influence your grades through your effort, and you can influence team dynamics by your attitude and what you say. But again, you don't control those things. Influence isn't control. Influence is, hey, if I show up every day and I have a really good attitude, my team might appreciate that, right? And others may act the same way. Or, in my relationship with my wife, if I'm treating her poorly, I'm going to influence what that relationship looks like, versus if I, come home and help and do things that are beneficial to the relationship, I'm going to influence the relationship to move in the right direction. I don't control it, because at the end of the day, a spouse can make whatever choice they want to make, and they could destroy the relationship. So we're influencing it, not controlling it. I hope that makes sense to our listeners.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And, I think that is an important sphere to put effort into, because I think the sphere that you can influence is such an important one to focus on. Now, control obviously is big too, but I feel like maybe influence, and correct me if I'm wrong here, is going to take more effort, right? Because it often does involve other people. And so, I think in that instance, it is going to be important to really do your best and to really put forth that effort, because it's just going to make life easier, because that's where your attitude can really make or break the situation, is in this circle.
Yeah, and what happens is, when we understand what we can control and we understand what we influence and how we influence, we use what we can control to influence for good.
Yeah.
Hopefully that's the goal. So
yeah, because the exact opposite can be true. Like you said, like your example with the spouse. I mean, the same thing goes with all aspects of life. If you show up every day to practice and you've got a crappy attitude, you're influencing your team, and not in a positive way. So,
yep.
Be
or work, right? If you come
Yes.
to work with a crappy attitude and complaining all the time, and it's not my job kind of an attitude, you're influencing your work team that you're a part of, and pretty soon somebody else is going to take what they can control, which might be to fire you. And so you want to pay attention to what's going on here.
Yeah. Okay. So circle 3, things that I cannot control. Break those down.
Yeah. And here's where we spend most of our time, unfortunately, as human beings, is we spend all of our time in this third circle, and it's worthless because we can't control it. We cannot control other people's choices. We can't control the weather. We can't control social media, coaches, teachers, bosses. We cannot control other people and what they're doing. We can't even control our past mistakes. They're behind us. They've happened, and we can't control the outcome of those mistakes. We can't control other people's opinions about us or anything else. Again, we could influence them, but that moves us right back into what is in that circle of what we can control. So that's where we want to start to look at, well, how much time are we spending in this circle?
All right. So let's talk about how anxiety often grows when we spend most of our energy in circle 3. So let's talk about why teens often get stuck there. So I think a big trap is worrying about other people's opinions. And this is actually part of teen development, is they really develop this concern and this worry that everybody is watching them and everybody is thinking about them. That's pretty developmentally normal. And so, I think it would be important to discuss this and maybe how we can help our teens avoid this trap, because it's very much a part of that teen angst and just teen development. So break that down for me and help us understand that.
The best thing I heard for this was from another life coach, Jody Moore. And she says, what someone else thinks about me is none of my business. So I think that's empowering. That helps you to let go of that control and let go of that responsibility you feel to try to make everyone happy with you and control their opinions about you. So I'm not saying it's easy either, and you have to remind yourself, but it's none of your business what other people think about you. That's for them to think about you. But what I like to say to my kids is something like, who do you want to be? Who do you want to show up as? Do you want to be kind? Do you want to talk about other people? Do you want to be confident? Do you want to be proud of yourself? So what can you control? Because you can't control what other people think, but you can control who you want to be and how you want to show up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, anxiety, back to your point, I love what Selina said about, what other people think and believe about you is not your business. I do love that. And when we do make it our business, that's when anxiety increases for us. And it's not a place we want to spend our time. On the converse of that, if we spend our time in the circle of what we can control, that's where confidence grows for our children, because they recognize what they can do and they see the impact that managing what they can control can have. My teacher sucks and they're really difficult, and that's why I'm getting a bad grade. And spending our time trying to control what our teacher is doing will create anxiety. Well, crap, what kind of grade am I getting? Am I going to pass this class? And all of a sudden the anxiety goes through the roof, versus maybe the teacher does suck. Maybe the teacher's terrible. There are terrible teachers. That does happen. And if we spend our time, well, I can control my attitude and my effort and what I'm putting in. And all of a sudden we start putting in the effort and changing the attitude. And guess what? The confidence builds because the grades improve. Well, maybe not always. The grades don't improve, but the confidence will always improve when we focus on the things that we can control.
Yeah, absolutely. And, like we've said, you're going to run into people who just are not good people. And there's nothing you can do about that. So here's another one that teens often do. And this also is very much not a teen thing, because I myself fall into this trap a lot. And so many teens will carry things like their friends' emotions, their parents' conflict, relationship drama, right? So oftentimes teens feel responsible, or they feel obligated to fix the problem. They feel obligated to take it on. And, to an extent, that is a good quality. And that doesn't mean that they can't be compassionate. They can't try to help out. Obviously they could always be a listening ear to a friend, but, it can be a very fine line. So how do we help our teen find that balance of compassion doesn't require carrying everyone else's burden. So where's that line, and how do we help teach that to our teens?
Well, and you're right, Liz, it's not just teens. This is, again, a human struggle because we're empathetic, right? We care, we want to fix things for people. And sometimes when we see somebody go through something difficult, it hurts our hearts because maybe we've been through something similar, and therefore we know how difficult it might be or how challenging it might be. And so we tend to want to carry that for them because we know how to carry it, right? But there is a really big difference here in being compassionate and carrying their burden. And one of the things that I like to talk about when I'm working with maybe a teen that's struggling with something like this is that, there's a big difference between owning somebody else's problem and helping them with it. The way I like to approach this is to explain that you only have a certain amount of capacity to carry burdens as a human being. Like, if you tried to carry all of your friends' burdens and all of their emotions, your parents' conflicts, all the relationship drama, like, pretty soon you're going to burn out and you just can't do it anymore. It's going to bring you down. It's not going to bring them up. Why? Because you can't control what they're doing. So we symbolically can give it back to them, right? We can be a listening ear. A friend comes to us and, they're really frustrated because, their best friend just, was mean to them or whatever it might be. Maybe, they got kicked out of a friend group somehow or whatever. We can listen, but because we can't control what they do and how they feel and what their experiences are, we give that back to them. When they walk away, we say, this is their burden to carry, not mine, because I can't control it. We often try and carry the burden, but we can't do anything about it. So we really can't carry it, and that weighs us down. And so giving that back to them symbolically by saying to ourselves, this is theirs, especially like parents' conflict, right? Parents will do this a lot to their kids, especially when they're in a high conflict relationship. They'll try and bring the kids on, oh, your dad did this or your mom is doing that. And all of a sudden the child feels like they've got to be the parent or be the responsible party, but they can't. They literally can't carry that. And so, you might listen to your parents, especially if you're an older teen and that's been the pattern. I don't think it's a healthy pattern for parents to do that to their kids, but if they have, then, at the end of the conversation, when we walk away, it's not your relationship to fix because you have no capacity to fix it. There's nothing you can do to fix that relationship. They have to do the work. You might give advice. You might give direction as an older individual. Like, if my parents were having struggles, I could give advice and direction. But at the end of the day, I can't fix it for them. And so we give that back to them. After the relationship, this is for you. This is for you to do. And there's nothing I can do for you to fix that. And so it's yours. And now we can focus back on things that we can control ourselves. We can control our attitudes and our feelings and our thoughts and our actions towards that person, but we can't control what they do.
Yeah. And that can take some practice, right? I mean, especially when you've got a friend that you care so much about and you so desperately want to help. And, I think also reminding your kids, that's a beautiful quality. I love how much you want to help, and don't ever lose your compassion, but don't take your compassion to the point that it's detrimental to your own well-being. So you guys once said something to me that I think we could also point out. So, especially when it comes to maybe family dynamics and when we're trying to help family conflict peaceful, when we're trying to maybe resolve it. So keep in mind, so this was something that you guys actually said to me once that I thought was very profound. Peacemaking does not mean people pleasing. And, so oftentimes we fall into this idea of we want to make everybody happy and we try to get into people pleasing. Okay, so oftentimes parents can fall into this trap of wanting to rescue or take over the situation, which is going to remove responsibility and accountability. And we've discussed this before, but I think in these instances, it's worth helping our kids balance this fine line. So tell me how we can help our kids take ownership without taking over.
Yeah, I think that's important, Liz. As parents, we want to fix, right? We don't like to see our kids hurt. We don't like to see them struggle. When in reality, when kids have ownership of their actions and behaviors, they will do much better, and they'll have a greater amount of growth. When we try and take over or we try and rescue them from everything, what are they learning? And this might be really especially true if we look at like, oh, we have this teacher that's really difficult. If we want to come in and rescue them and take over, and we're going to meet with the teacher and we're going to fix all of this. And I'm not saying there aren't times that should happen, but often if we just take over and rescue them from whatever situation they're facing without allowing them to own it and focus on what they can control, they don't ever learn how to manage that. Because the reality is, if we look at, adult life, we're going to have bosses that aren't fair. We're going to have bosses that don't treat us well. We're going to have relationships that are difficult. Maybe we're a boss and we've got employees that are difficult to work with. And if somebody else has always taken over for us and always rescued us, how do we learn to manage that? So we move right back into what can you control? Like look at those 3 circles that we talked about earlier in the episode. What can you control? What can you influence? And what can you not control? So if we look at like a teen that's forgetting homework, instead of trying to fix that for them and emailing the teacher and saying, hey, can we do this? Can we do that? We could ask them a simple question such as, what can you do different? Or what can you do to make tomorrow different? And that could be a really powerful tool for them. Or if a teen's losing their temper, we might ask a question like, what would you like to do now to repair the relationship? Because responsibility would include repairing relationships and repairing what we've done wrong. So I think those are some great examples of how to teach ownership of situations.
But man, that's really hard, isn't it? Because I feel like as a mom, that's my job, is to help my kids. So it's hard to rein that back and know when to step in to help them and protect them, and when to allow them to learn and grow. And I do know, in the big grand picture of it all, it is better when I can step back and let them deal with the situations that they have on their own, because I have seen that they've learned a lot more than when I come in and fix it.
And that comes back to that compassion piece that we talked about earlier, and it's just human nature. And I'm not going to say that that's a bad thing. In fact, I'm going to say that's a good, wonderful, beautiful thing. And I think that that's a very admirable quality as a parent. And so, what Selina is doing is not inherently wrong. In fact, it may not even be bad, but what we can do is be better, right? And so, like, is it okay to rescue teens when things get really hard? I think so. And certainly, as we said before, there are times where it's warranted. But is it better or even best to let them figure it out and let them try on their own first? At the very least, I think that's very plausible.
Yeah, I agree with that statement that it can be okay. And sometimes it's fully appropriate, right? I mean, I can think about an experience I had with my second oldest in a classroom where we allowed her to work with a teacher, but it just became so toxic, and this teacher was so problematic that it was impacting health and other issues. And this was elementary school, I think it was late elementary school or early junior high. And I had to intervene, and it was absolutely the right choice to make and to get her removed from that situation, because of the way it was impacting her and because of how difficult this teacher was. Started calling my daughter a liar, and my daughter didn't lie at all. She was, in fact, the teacher was the one lying. And so there was an appropriate time. And I guess that's our job as parents, right? Is to find that balance of, when do I intervene and when do I allow them to learn and to control what they can control? When do I give them ownership of the struggles or situations that are happening?
Yeah. It can be a fine and difficult line, but don't sweat it if you don't get it right every time. You're never going to as a parent. And so, that's what this is all about, is learning and growing. So let's get into the modeling piece of this. So some really good examples of this, and where I think a lot of human beings struggle, is traffic. And we've all been in that situation of, we are really frustrated because that driver is driving like an idiot. So tell me why that's problematic. And you know what? There are dangerous drivers on the road, and there are drivers that do make poor decisions that can impact safety of other people, but what's a good way to handle this? Or how can we model better for our teens?
You're right. There are. But this is a perfect example of the real world. And that is that we can't control those other drivers. We can't control if they're going to cut us off or not, or if they're going to blow that stop sign, or if they're going to, do whatever they're going to do. We cannot control that. We can control ourselves. And it's a great opportunity with our kids to just say, you know what? This is really frustrating and I cannot control the traffic, but I get to choose how I respond. And, this is a great one and a great lesson to teach where we don't know what's going on. I was that really crappy driver a few weeks ago when we had an emergency situation going on with my grandkids, and I drove like a complete idiot. And one of the things that it did for me is it helped remind me that, sometimes when somebody does something really stupid around us, we don't know what's going on with them. And so it's a great opportunity to teach our children, like, that's out of my control. Like, I can't control what they do. And I can just choose to believe that they're in an emergency situation and they need to move quickly and get to where they need to go. And the best thing I can do is just stay out of the way.
Yep. Okay, so another good one is family conflict. So this one can be really tricky because family conflict, first of all, it's going to happen. It's inevitable,
Yes.
right? But it's harder because it does have a direct impact on you, and it's not something that you can avoid. Nobody can avoid family conflict. So it can be a little bit harder to recognize what is within your control, right? And this is such a big one for, even young kids, but teens as well. So how do we deal with the family conflict realm of what we can control?
Well, and that is an important one because it is going to happen. It's going to be a part of your life. There's going to be conflict. But again, this is a perfect example. If we manage ourselves, and this is what I can control, this is what I can't control. I can control how I speak about family, how I respond to the way they're behaving, but I cannot control the way they're behaving. And we can teach emotional regulation by living this principle. We could get upset and angry and throw big fits because, my mother-in-law did this or my father-in-law did that, or, my sister did this or my cousin did that. Like we can be really angry, or we can show some emotional regulation and control the way we speak and how we respond. And we can respond with kindness, or we can respond with, boundaries if those are healthy boundaries, but we cannot control what they do. We get to control our own emotions around it. We often hear kids say things, well, but he made me so mad. And it's a great opportunity as parents. I guarantee you that that driver pissed me off. Well, you know what? Actually, he didn't. You allowed yourself to be angry. You allowed yourself to get upset with him. He doesn't have the authority or the power to control your emotions. You control those. And so these are great opportunities to model this for our children. And it's hard. I struggle with so many of these things myself, but it's an important aspect of parenting that we model how we respond to those kinds of situations.
And a great way to model can sometimes be, I'm feeling this. So this person made this choice and I feel this way because of their choice. And to say, I need a breather. I need to take a few minutes and get my own emotions under control. Because, like we've said, people are going to do things that are going to trigger us, right? And it's not the emotion that we're feeling that's the problem. It's how we handle and we deal with that emotion, right? So like, yeah, if your sister-in-law says something or a family member says something that is just blatantly rude and that maybe they shouldn't have, it's okay to feel those emotions. But where that modeling piece comes in is when you can say calmly, I don't appreciate that, or even just walking away from the situation. Great way to model with your teen too, because your teen is going to say or do something that is going to make you want to yell at them because they're just really good at pushing buttons. And a great way to model what you can control is, hey, I'm feeling heated. I'm just going to step away. Great way to model that.
Absolutely.
All right. So here is a question for parents to really consider that comes to this modeling piece, right? So do I spend more time talking about problems or helping my teen identify what they can actually do? So perfect example to think about as you go through this week. So Next week, we are going to get into confidence without arrogance, and we will see you all then. Have a question? How about a topic you'd like us to cover? Send us an email at mentalhealthpod21@gmail.com.